Hello everybody, Mr. Akins here and welcome to What's on the Comic Rack. In this video I'm going to respond to Comic Collector Geek's Friday Challenge Plastic Age covers, or top 10 90s covers. So for me, the 90s were a strange time. At the beginning of the 90s I was collecting and reading a lot of comics, but by the end of the 90s I had quit collecting. At the beginning of the 90s I was in college. After that I graduated, had a series of jobs, and by the end of the 90s I had got my first teaching job. As a result, I didn't have as much time and I didn't have as much money to collect comics. But during the 90s, they had a lot of things that they were doing to try to get me to buy comics. All types of gimmicks. Glow in the dark, chrome, embossed, trading cards, you named it, they tried it to get my attention and buy those comics. I'm going to focus in this video on my top 10 gimmicks of the 1990s. So if there's a gimmick I forgot, please put it in the comments below. This is just my top 10. So let's get to looking at those comics. Adventures of Superman number 500, published in 1993. What 90s gimmick does this comic represent? The poly bag. I absolutely hated poly bags back in the day, and they're probably not my favorite even today. I mean, what is this comic? I can't tell. It's got a bag over it. For someone interested in following a story, enjoying cover art, this right here is horrible. Now, Tom Grummett did the cover on this, but how would I know it's in a bag? Polybags don't evoke as much emotion from me these days, but back in the day they made me furious. Of course, the one I bought back in the day doesn't have a poly bag, because why do you buy comics? To read them. So I had to tear it open and read it. I bought this one in the dollar bin at my LCS. Now this is somewhat of a key. It's the first appearance of John Henry, who later becomes Steel. First appearance of Connor Kent as Superboy. First appearance of Cyborg Superman, and the first appearance of Eradicator. Next we have the Avengers number 360, published in 1993. What 90s gimmick does this comic represent? The embossed comic cover. This cover is done by Steve Epting. There are some very cool covers done by Steve Epting, and others I think are okay. This is how you take an okay cover and turn it into something I dislike. I really don't like this cover. My favorite comic art styles are pop art, painted covers, and this is the complete opposite of that. At this point in the 90s, I am already sounding like an old man get off my lawn. But it didn't stop me from buying it, because I was collecting the Avengers and this was the next issue. So I had to get it. This is a super minor key, since it's the first appearance of the Anti-Vision. And the Vision's consciousness is switched with the Anti-Vision, therefore returning him to his original red, green, and yellow design. The Secret Defenders number 1, published in 1993. Now, what 90s gimmick does this comic represent? The metallic cover. Throughout the 90s, one way comic companies marketed comics was the metallic cover. Now we're getting into some gimmicks that I actually like. The metallic cover is one of them. There were tons of metallic covers throughout the 90s, but this was the first one I came across. But in looking for metallic covers, I said, why don't I find some other metallic covers from the 90s to go with this Secret Defenders. Another thing this comic represents is the sheer volume of titles and comics that were being put out at the time, where quantity was vast, but quality was hard to come by. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Shadowhawk 2, number 1, published in 1993. Seems to be a theme here of 1993. What 90s gimmick does this comic represent? The die-cut cover. To truly appreciate this cover, it must be taken out of its protective poly bag, which I have done very carefully to protect this high dollar comic. Not only do we have some die-cut action here, but we've also got some chrome action going on for that extra flair. This is a gold mine waiting to be mined. Once the Shadowhawk movie comes out, I will be prepared. X-Men #1, published in 1991. What 90s gimmick does this comic represent? The explosion of variant covers. This is one, if not the biggest selling comic book of all time, with over 8 million copies sold, due primarily because of this variant cover gimmick. This issue featured 5 variant covers that interlocked to create a Jim Lee illustrated landscape of the X-Men fighting Magneto, and a special version which contained the entire image. The intentional variant cover didn't originate in the 1990s, but they definitely exploded during the 1990s. I picked this issue up at my LCS for $1 in the dollar bin. This is the one that shows all the covers together. Ghostrider #15, published in 1991. What 90s gimmick does this comic represent? The glow-in-the-dark cover. Now earlier I showed Avengers #360, where in my opinion the gimmick made the cover worse. Not the case with this comic. I feel the gimmick actually enhances the cover art. There are other comics that have glow-in-the-dark covers, but this visually striking flaming skull I think is the best. Only wish I could show it in all its glory in the dark. Jack Kirby's Secret City Saga #1, published in 1993. What 90s gimmick does this comic represent? Trading cards with comics. So let's combine two industries together. Let's take comic books and non-sports trading cards, and the two converged in the 1990s. Non-sports cards were around before the 1990s, but they exploded during the advent of the speculator boom. Marvel put out cards. DC put out cards. Even card companies put out comics to promote their cards. What better card company was there at the time than Topps? So let's look at some of those cards that were included. In this one, we've got Captain Glory. We've got a Green Hornet card inside a poly bag. And some nice Jack Kirby cards even. Marvel's #1, published in 1994. What 90s gimmick does this comic represent? The acetate cover. Everything about these comics is beautiful. Alex Ross's painted artwork is stunning. How could you enhance such a beautiful cover? By unveiling an outer acetate protective cover for all 4 issues of this series. The acetate produces a shimmering effect that enhances Alex Ross's artwork. The acetate and the artwork create a comic that just begs to be displayed. Uncanny X-Men #304, published in 1993. What 90s gimmick does this comic represent? Hologram card on the cover. In 1993, the X-Men were celebrating their 30th anniversary, and to celebrate, X-related titles featured a hologram card on the cover. Uncanny X-Men #304 has this hologram of Magneto. Hope we can pick that up. I think that's a better shot. X-Force with a hologram of Cable right there. And X-Men with a hologram of Gambit. Now, the card is a unique feature on all these at the time. I certainly wouldn't want this on every cover, but at the time it was a neat addition to these books. Protectors #5, published in 1993. What 90s gimmick does this comic represent? The greatest one ever. A Force Beam Hole comic. My absolute favorite gimmick comic from the 1990s. The thought process in the 90s was to get noticed. You get noticed, you sell comics. Glow-in-the-dark covers, chrome covers, embossed covers, trading cards, those things will get you noticed. But this, my friends, certainly will get you noticed. How can you ignore a hole that is put through the entire issue. Alan the Comic Collector Geek has thousands upon thousands of comics. But does Alan have this comic, which I consider the greatest gimmick comic of the 1990s? So if you'd like to participate in this challenge, find some 90s comics, make a video, and make sure you put hashtag 90s, that's hashtag 90s, and hashtag Friday Comic Challenge. It'd also be a good idea to put at Comic Collector Geek in the title so Alan can see your video. This is also the point where we do some shout outs. I'm going to shout out Coffee and Comics, see what he can do with this challenge. If you like coffee and you like comics, check his channel out. Also love to see Obito Comics, see if he can put out a video on these top 10 plastic age comics. And finally, I'd like to shout out Next Gen Collector. He just hit 100 subs. I'd love to see what he can do with this top 10 90s or plastic age challenge. So until next time, we'll see you around the comic rack.